Welcome to the Power of Purity podcast, the show that empowers men to experience their sexual gift in a healthier way. Now here's your host, Tony Ingracia.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Power of Purity podcast, and thank you for being with me today. And I do trust that this episode is going to be a blessing and an encouragement to you as you continue forward on your journey of purity. I thought I'd start today with just a little note that I received from a brother somewhere in the United States. He says, "Hello, Tony, my name is blank, and I'm a believer in Christ, but I've struggled with a porn addiction for most of my life. After listening to your podcast, I now know that I can't do this alone, despite my very best efforts. I was curious if you know if there are any support groups in my area, blank, that meet at least once a week. Thank you for your time." And then he signs his name. And of course, I'm not going to mention his name or even the area of the country that he's in. And unfortunately, I had to write back to this brother and say, "I'm so sorry, but I'm not aware of a particular support group in your area." But I tried to encourage him with some other thoughts. And I'd just like to say that I believe that this brother is on the right rabbit trail because he's come into the place where he realizes that he cannot fight this battle alone. He's going to have to get into a community of fellow strugglers that can journey together. And a huge part of that is just the idea of coming into the light, of renouncing the secrecy and the hiding and the duplicity that he's been living in, because he's willing to make himself accountable and transparent to somebody else. And that is a gigantic stepping stone forward on the healing process. So I would encourage you, brother, absolutely to follow this rabbit trail. If nothing else, seek out an SAA group, Sex Addicts Anonymous group in your area. Maybe you can check with your pastor, check with some churches in the area, see if there's any kind of a sexual recovery group in your area. And if all else fails, then I would highly encourage you to consider trying to find a couple other brothers that you can solicit into this journey with you. If you're involved in a particular church, if you know a couple brothers, you have a sense or intuition that you might be able to talk with. Maybe you could ask your pastor, do you know any other guys in church that are struggling with this issue? And if you were to approach a couple other brothers and just say, "Hey, I'm kind of struggling with this. I'm looking for somebody to journey with that might be an accountability partner. Maybe we could meet once a week. We could talk. We could share our stories. We could pray together." And I just have to believe that if you sincerely are motivated and interested in doing this, that God will help you find some other brothers that can journey with you. I have absolutely no doubt that there are many other guys in your area, in your church, in your community of faith that are struggling with these issues. And you guys could begin to meet together. And if nothing else, you could pick one of any number of different resources or books related to this topic and just begin to work through it. I think that the material you're working through almost becomes secondary to the fact that you're meeting with some other brothers and just talking and being honest and walking in the light and beginning to work on these things together. And if nothing else, of course, you're welcome to use the Power of Purity material. I have on my website the Power of Purity video conference. There's 30 videos there that some guys could work through together. You could watch a video, then you could talk about it. And of course, there is the Power of Purity podcast. And this particular episode, I believe, is episode 153. So you guys could go back and literally just listen to one podcast together and then talk about it for an hour. Or you could read a book together. Order my book, Stories, or The Power of Purity. and work through one of these books together. But just the fact that you're meeting with some brothers, you're being honest, you're walking in the light, you're beginning to enter this journey of purity with a community of other fellow strugglers, it is a gigantic stepping stone forward. So I just bless this brother, and I pray that he will be successful in finding some other brothers that will be willing to journey with him on this pathway of purity. And if you are in a place where you have not come to where this brother is, where he says here something very significant in his letter, I now know that I cannot do this alone despite my best efforts. So I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but if you're still in the place where you are hiding your secrets and you're, in a sense, living a lie, you're living in the shadows, you're living in a place of duplicity, and nobody knows the truth about who you really are and what you're really doing, what you're really struggling with, then the bad news is you will never, ever get free of this problem and this struggle and this addiction. There's an old adage in AA, our recovery circles, that says something like, you're as sick as your secrets. So as long as your secrets live, your sickness will live and your sickness will be empowered. So you're going to have to come to the place that this brother is coming to. He's realizing he can't do it alone. He's going to have to come into the light, get honest, find some other fellow strugglers, and begin this journey together. And it is a gigantic stepping stone forward. So God bless you, brother, and I pray that you have success in finding a group in your area. And with that being said, you guys, I'm going to jump into today's episode, and I want to start this episode today with a gigantic disclaimer, and that is that what I'm going to try to talk about today, I just want to freely admit right up front that I am way in over my head. It's like I don't even know how to swim, and I'm jumping into the very deep end of the pool. And I've titled this episode, The Human Brain, Neuroplasticity, and Porn Addiction. And I just want to say a couple things here to begin. I feel like, on my own journey of purity, that everything that God's taught me and how God's changing my heart and my life and how God has set me free from my sexual addiction, I'm trying to share my story with other men and help other guys. And so on my journey, I've kind of created this body of work with the Power of Purity. I have my 30 video conference sessions, and then I have the podcast sessions, and I've written 3 books on the topic of purity, and I do conferences when God gives me the opportunity, and I do counseling. And I put these episodes together and these video teachings and different things as God is teaching me a particular aspect of the journey, or God's working in my heart and life in a certain way, and I'm seeing this topic and I'm realizing, man, this is good. This is a huge part of the journey of purity. And I think of the metaphor of the diamond. It's one stone. A diamond is beautiful, but it's one stone, but it has many different facets. So this body of work has many different facets. The 30 video sessions and all the different podcasts and the books. But I feel like there's kind of been this huge gaping hole right in the middle of everything that I've been learning and everything that I've been teaching. And this hole essentially has to do with the concept of brain science, the human brain, and this concept of neuroplasticity and how this affects addiction. And I freely admit that at the very best, I'm in kindergarten on this stuff, maybe first grade. So I'm really very much an amateur on these things. I've been beginning to study it, and I'm trying to learn about it, and I'm just really entering into this. And to be honest with you, I have reached out to 3 different brain experts to try to get somebody on the podcast that's kind of an expert, that's educated about this stuff, that I can talk to and I can interview and ask questions and begin to create a frame of reference that will help us understand this and the significance of this and what do we do about it in our journey of recovery. And I have struck out and struck out and struck out, and I haven't had any luck with that yet. And therefore, instead of an expert today, you have me, Tony Ingrassia, who at the very best is in kindergarten on this stuff, but I'm just going to kind of share with you guys. I'm just thinking out loud today. I really don't even have that many notes in front of me, but this has been very much in the forefront of my head and my heart. And so I just want to talk a little bit about it and how I think it relates to our struggle with sex and our struggle with our orgasm, and how it concerns the issue of us learning to control sex instead of being controlled by sex. And let me just say that as I enter into this, I do not think this topic is a little thing. I think it is a huge thing. I think it's very, very significant. I think it has profound implications. I think it's important for us to understand, and it's going to be very important and significant stepping stone on our healing journey. So I think maybe where I'll begin, I have a few pages of notes here, but I'm literally just going to set them down. I'm just talking from my heart. And I want to share with you guys something that's been going on with me personally, and that is, you may know that I'm a licensed professional counselor myself, but I myself have been going to counseling. I went back to therapy recently, a couple months ago, because I've been dealing with some things in my personal life that have just kind of been upsetting, and I felt disoriented and upset and kind of like I'm losing my equilibrium, and just some things in my personal life related to my family. So I thought I'd go back to counseling and just kind of seek some help and guidance and let somebody speak into my life. And it's good to have a person that you can talk to, a sounding board to kind of work through some things with. And so I'll just say, by the way, I think that it's good for therapists to go to therapy. So I freely admit that I'm going to therapy. I need therapy. I've been in therapy a lot in my life. When Sherry and I were going through the crisis of our marriage, we went to counseling for over 6 years. And then I've been back to counseling subsequent to that. And now I'm back in counseling again. But the point I'm getting to is that the therapist that I'm seeing right now is using a technique that I've never ever been exposed to personally before. I'm aware of it a little bit, and it's called EMDR. And I have just a little bit of a sense of what EMDR therapy is. It's a particular therapeutic intervention or technique. And again, I'm kind of like in kindergarten on this. I don't really understand it that much. And when I found out that this therapist that I'm seeing does this treatment called EMDR, my first instinct was to immediately rush to the internet and Google it and study it and figure out what is EMDR and how does it work, so I understand what I'm subjecting myself to. But then I caught myself, and with deliberate intention, I made a decision to not study EMDR, that I don't want to approach this experience cognitively. In other words, I don't want to approach it primarily through my head and my brain with information. Like, I want to understand what this is, so that as I approach it, there's kind of a cognitive thing going on. And I actually thought to myself, I don't want to understand what EMDR is. I don't want to study it. I don't want to try to get this cognitive, informational knowledge about it. Instead, I just want to almost be like a child and enter into the experience that I really don't understand exactly what it is, but I just want to experience it, and I want to reap the benefit of it, whether I really understand it in my head or not. So it's kind of like this. I really don't understand all that much about electricity, and I'm certainly not an expert when it comes to electricity and the flow of electricity and how do you ground something and how does the current move and what's the difference between AC and DC current and how do electrons move down a wire. And I don't understand electricity, but I do understand one thing, and that is that if I walk into a dark room and I turn the switch on, the lights come on. So I don't need to understand electricity. All I need to know is, hey, if you push this little switch up and down, it goes on and off, so I can turn on the lights. So I don't need to understand it in order to reap the benefit of the thing. And that's kind of what I decided about EMDR. I don't want to try to understand it. I just want to try to reap the benefit. So I just kind of tried to let go of my need to understand, in a sense, and be in control. And I just tried to lay that at the feet of Jesus and pray for the blood of Jesus over it and say, Lord, I just feel like you have me in the place in my life right now where I'm going to see this therapist and they're using this particular technique and I really don't understand it, but I trust that this is where you've led me, God. This is where you have me. So I want to enter into this like a child the best I can. I don't want to place a demand upon it. I don't want to understand it or try to control it. I just want to submit to it. I want this to happen to me. I want you to do in my heart and my life whatever it is, God, that you're trying to accomplish at this time. I want to try to cooperate with the process. And so that's what I'm doing. But here's the point I'm getting to. With all of that said, here's what EMDR is, and I'm going to give you my kindergarten understanding of it, and I'm not even sure that my kindergarten understanding is correct. But this is kind of the concept that I have, and it concerns what's happening in my brain, the physical organ, the organic organ, my head, my brain, and one of the realities that emerges concerns this idea of neuroplasticity, which means that pathways get established in a person's brain. And that can be a big problem because it helps us understand the concept of addiction. Because when a person gets addicted to a particular activity or a drug or whatever it is, it's like something gets embedded in the brain, these pathways become established, and then the person is compelled to follow that path over and over and over again, and that thing gets embedded even deeper in the brain. And this is part of why an addiction is so powerful, because a pathway has become embedded in the brain. So here's a metaphor, and it's kind of a silly metaphor, but I warned you guys, and these are Tonyisms here. I'm speaking on my kindergarten level about this stuff that I really don't understand. It's like I'm trying to explain to you right now how electricity works, when in reality, all I really know is the switch goes up and down. But I'm trying to talk about electricity, okay? So, do you know what a rivulet is? The word rivulet. And I understand that what a rivulet is, imagine that there's a hill outside and it's been dry all summer, like there's a little bit of a drought, and so the ground actually begins to crack. It gets so dry. And when the ground cracks and then eventually it rains, the rain finds its way, the water finds its way to the lowest point, right? So the water says, oh, here's a crack, let's flow down this crack. So the water seeps into that crack and goes down the hillside. And then it rains again and again and again. And as it does, that's what's called a rivulet. It's a crease or a crack in the ground. And each time the water comes through it, it gets a little deeper and a little deeper and a little deeper and a little deeper. And you come back years later and there might be a big gully down the side of that hill that if you got down in it and stood in the bottom of the gully, the ground level would be over your head because that rivulet, that ditch is so deep now. And so, in a sense, This is like my kindergarten understanding of what happens in the brain through this concept of neuroplasticity. The brain can be molded, the brain can be fashioned, pathways can become established in the human brain. So what happens is I get involved with pornography, I look at porn, and it creates these feel-good chemicals in me that I'm going to be talking about here upcoming, that I'm trying to get to in my little talk here. And so I look at porn, and these feel-good chemicals are like the rain, and there's these explosions of these chemicals. It's like a rain shower in my head, in my brain. And so these chemicals like rush through my brain, and they make a little path. There's like a crack in somewhere in my brain now. And then I look at porn again, and it rains again in my brain. And then I look at porn again and again and again. And each time I do, these chemicals are rushing through my brain over and over again. And that rivulet or that pathway in my brain is getting deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And that's what neuroplasticity is. The human brain can actually change. I've created a pattern or a pathway. And this is a big, big problem, guys, because there's this dynamic going on then in your brain where your brain identifies what makes you feel good, and then it actually begins to seek that out and to crave that and to tell you and to tell your body, hey, I want that again. That feels good. And so you're compelled to seek that behavior or that trigger again, whatever it is. For our purpose here, my metaphor is looking at porn, but it could be doing drugs. It could be eating food. It could be alcohol. It could be gambling. Whatever activity that a person is becoming involved in that is pleasing to them, that causes this rain shower in their head, the release of these feel-good chemicals, and they begin to flow through your brain. Well, you can see how that's going to become very foundational to the concept of addiction. So if we're going to get free from our sexual addiction, we're going to have to understand something about what's going on in our brain, and we're going to have to try to deal with this. And that's what I'm trying to figure out, and that's why I'm trying to get a brain expert on the Power of Purity podcast so I can get some clarity and understanding and wisdom and information and convey this to you guys, and we can learn together and figure out what is this piece of the puzzle on the healing journey. Anyway, I'm ahead of myself right now because I started talking about EMDR, so I'm going back to EMDR now, and I'm going to try to explain to you my experience of this because I've experienced this now several times in these sessions. And we don't do EMDR every time I have a counseling session. We might just talk for a couple sessions, but then my therapist does this little exercise called EMDR. And what EMDR is, if you can picture, she has a little unit that just has batteries in it and looks maybe about the size of your wallet or something, like a little transistor radio, and it's got these little dials and buttons on it, and it's got these two little wires that come out to these two little like modules at the end of the wire. It's almost just like a little rubber ball or something. And I put one in each hand, my right hand and my left hand, and then the therapist adjusts the electrical pulse. And it's not like an electric shock. It doesn't hurt or anything like that, but it just sends an electrical impulse and it makes these little balls vibrate in your hand. So it kind of buzzes. So you feel it buzzing in your hands and it alternates. So it's right hand, left hand, right hand, left hand, right hand, left hand. So it's going beep, 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 beep. And she adjusts it to however I prefer it. There's no right or wrong to the way that this works. So It's just whatever feels right to me. So she says, do you want it faster or slower? So like it feels weird to me if it's going boop, 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 back and forth. That feels too fast. So I say to her, no, I think it should be slower. I want to feel it go boop, 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 boop. So I tell her I like it a little bit slower like that. And then she says, how do you want the intensity of the vibration? So she can set it up or she can set it down. Make it stronger, make it weaker. And once we get the signal set the way that it feels good to me, the way that I like it, and then my therapist leads me through this little session, and what we do is we identify one particular story or area of my life that we're exploring, and she just begins to ask me questions about that, a series of questions. And it might be something like this. And I'm just using this as an example now. It's not an actual event that I've done in session. But for example, one time I remember when I was a kid, there was this situation where I was laying on the couch and I had my shoes on my feet and my feet on the couch with my shoes. So my dad came in the room, and as usual, my dad wasn't in a very good mood. And so my dad did what he sometimes did. He was angry and he yelled at me, and he actually slapped me in the face. Get your shoes off of the couch. You know better, blah, blah, blah. So let's say that we're focusing on that particular event in my EMDR session. So the therapist says to me, well, just think about that for a moment, Tony. Just sit in that, think about that. And what does it provoke in you? What does it stir in you? What do you feel rising up? And so I say to her, well, I feel fear. That made me feel very scared when that happened. I was afraid of my dad. And so then the therapist says, okay, well, just sit in that fear for a moment. Allow yourself to try to feel that fear and just be close to it. See if you can just sit in that for a moment. And she'll be quiet for a minute. And then she'll say, and now, Tony, what emerges? As you sit in that fear, what emerges? And maybe I say something like, this feels familiar to me because I've felt this feeling a lot. I've come to this place over and over again where I feel this fear. So then the therapist says to me, okay, well, Tony, just sit in that reality of the familiarity of this, that this has happened over and over again. Just sit with that for a minute and see how that feels. So I just sit there and I think about that. And then she says, okay, Tony, now, as you think about being on the couch and what your dad did, and that provoked a fear in you, and then that made you feel that this is familiar, it's happened before, what emerges now? What does that stir in you? And I might say, well, it makes me kind of angry. It makes me angry that I had to be so afraid of my dad. So then she says, oh, okay, just sit there in that sense of anger and let yourself feel that. Now, the whole time that this sequence of questions is occurring, guys, I want you to remember that this whole time in my hands are going boop, 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 like that. And here's my kindergarten explanation of what I think EMDR is supposed to do. Like I'm trying to explain to you electricity now, but all I really know is the switch goes up and down, okay? Is that these vibrations in your hand are detected, of course, by your brain, and each one is stimulating a different hemisphere of your brain, the right hemisphere, the left hemisphere, then the right hemisphere, then the left hemisphere, over and over again. So as I revisit this memory from my life, this kind of traumatic or painful or hurtful or shameful event from my life, my brain has a pattern or a pathway embedded in it that's been there for all these years associated with that particular event. My fear of my father. Or let's say, for example, that there was a young lady that was raped when she was 13 years old. And this has followed her for her whole life. So anytime that her rape comes up, or she thinks about it, or talks about it, or reflects on it, well, the brain has already associated and created a pathway in her brain over and over again, the feelings that she has associated with that rape that happened to her when she was 13 years old. So it's like another rain cloud, and there's these bursts of emotions and chemicals in her brain, and they go down the old rivulet. And so when she thinks of her rape, she feels that fear, she feels scared, she feels insecure. Maybe it makes her feel anger, or she hates men, or she loathes herself. She's full of self-contempt. It was my fault. I'm a stupid person. And over again, these chemicals flush through her brain, and they follow the old path, the old path, the old path. So that if this woman was to go and do EMDR therapy while these buzzers are going off in her hand, boop, 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 I think what it's doing is it's confusing her brain, because her brain wants to send the chemicals down the old path so that she remains the same, and that event holds the power over her brain and her life and her soul. But by doing EMDR, it's almost like confusing her brain, because when her brain is trying to follow the old pathway, but the brain is getting signaled back and forth, bloop, 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 bloop. It's like the brain gets confused and it don't know what to do, and therefore the signals can't go down the old path, so it's disrupting that old pattern, that old pathway, and therefore that old pathway is getting messed up. It's losing its balance and equilibrium. It's losing its power. It's like if you took a glass and dropped it on the floor, it would shatter. We want to shatter that old pathway. We want to interrupt it so that those chemicals can't flow that way anymore, so that that fear or that anger or that angst or that self-contempt, whatever it is that's associated with that, that's triggered through this activity in her brain, it's all getting jumbled up and disrupted and messed up, so that old pattern doesn't hold that power anymore. So we're actually teaching the brain to be different, to feel different, to have a different experience when it thinks of when I was raped when I was 13 years old. Now, I don't know if all that makes sense. I'm just doing my very best here, you guys, and I gave you a warning that this is my kindergarten explanation. But I hope that it kind of makes sense, and I hope you have some sense of where I'm trying to go with this, that this is part of the healing journey, I believe, for us to be healthier men sexually and to break the patterns of our sexual addiction. If you're still struggling with sex addiction, if you're still struggling with your addiction to pornography, I'm telling you guys, I know I'm giving a kindergarten explanation, but I think there's something here. The reason that porn holds so much power over you is because you have trained your brain and you have established pathways for these feel-good chemicals that are released every time you look at porn. The pathway is reinforced. And so if we're going to help you break your porn addiction, we're going to have to interrupt your brain, and we're going to have to interrupt those old pathways and those old patterns, and we're going to have to try to create something new and different. And the good news is, from what I understand, that this can be done. It's very hopeful. It's possible because of the neuroplasticity of the brain. The brain is not set in concrete. And just because an old pattern has existed for a long time doesn't mean that it's doomed to exist forever. We can actually interrupt those old patterns and mess them up and confuse them and disrupt them and actually begin to create a new pattern and a new rivulet, a new pathway in the brain, so that old thing doesn't hold the power that it used to hold. And that is good news, and it inspires hope and possibility and healing. And with that being said, guys, I know that I'm way over for this particular episode, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up today. If you're able to come back with me next week, I'm going to continue this discussion of the human brain, neuroplasticity, and porn addiction, and I'll continue to perpetrate my kindergarten explanations upon you. But be patient with me because I'm doing my best, and I fully intend to get a true brain expert on this podcast that's going to help us understand this stuff. And I just have this intuition. I feel like this is significant on the healing journey. So with that being said, I'm going to let you guys go. Guys, thanks for being with me. Be blessed. Have an awesome week. Have an awesome day. I speak blessings over you. In Jesus' name, I speak the blood of Jesus over you on your journey of purity. I encourage you to make quality decisions this week. I encourage you to continue to exercise your no muscle and be blessed in Jesus' name. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.
Thanks for listening. Visit powerofpurity.org for more resources and information. And if this podcast has been helpful or encouraging, please invite a friend to listen. Until next time, remember, there's power in purity.